Thank you for being here and for this show of interest in a topic that is very important to the Foundation and obviously to you about how we might better serve young people who are trying to make sense out of their own lives. And one of the access points we might be able to provide for them is deeper engagement in the arts. Before my remarks, though, as a visual learner, I'd like to give you a sense of what inspired us to make this research investment and also to find the people who could turn it into a story that is descriptive and hopefully useful. So as they say in television, can you roll the tape?
The arts and young people, they activate, they connect, they resonate.
What does high quality look like in out-of-school time arts programs? And what does it take to engage urban low-income youth in these programs, given that they face many obstacles and have many options for how to spend their free time?
Just because they're not investing money, they're really investing something that's more valuable than money, which is their time.
To answer these questions, the Wallace Foundation interviewed experts, including urban youth and their friends and families, as well as practitioners, researchers, and the staffs of some of the nation's best youth development arts programs.
We have some formal research and a lot of observation and a lot of wisdom that comes out of programs that are doing it really well.
The comprehensive research identified 10 principles for effective, high-quality programs. Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts is a new report that details this research. It illustrates how these 10 success principles can be used to engage tweens and teens in youth development arts programs.
We're going to work towards being excellent at something. We're going to put all of ourselves into it and work hard to do it, and we're going to have fun while we do it, and that happens.
They don't want to just play basketball. They want to make a difference. They want to help other people. They have enormous energy and capacity.
You can download the full Something to Say report and watch videos of exemplary organizations and interviews with practitioners and researchers by visiting wallacefoundation.org.
There are elements of programs that really can be learned from and taken and shared.
So inherent in the title of the report, Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts, there are at least two strong beliefs. The first being that after-school arts programs can, in fact, succeed. They can succeed in attracting and also maintaining the engagement of large numbers of young people in their programs. And secondly, that it is from the voice of the young people themselves that we will learn how to do this effectively and efficiently. What the research did not proceed with was to prove anything about the value of the proposition about art and its inherent and useful nature. We are convinced from the available and existing research and by examining the role of art in our own lives that deep engagement in high-quality arts experiences provide valuable benefits, including the confidence that comes with progressive skill building, increased empathy and cognitive growth, and at the group level, profound social bonds and communal meaning. Young people, as we found, especially those from the ages of 10 to 13, so-called tweens, can benefit particularly from arts instruction as they navigate the transition from childhood to the more independent, but also sometimes more rigid teen years. So what does it take to attract tweens to an arts program and to keep them coming back? Instead of guessing at the answers, we commissioned a rigorous study to find out, engaging a market research firm, Next Level SMG, to apply a consumer marketing approach. The researchers interviewed hundreds of tweens, teens, and their families, as well as the directors of exemplary youth arts programs nationwide and experts in youth arts education. What do tweens want in an arts program, and how does that stack up against what we often think they need? We find the answers compelling, useful, and sometimes surprising. We hope you agree with them. Our hope is that this work will provide both practical guidance to those interested in engaging tweens in high-quality arts instruction, as well as the inspiration that is both possible and that it's vital to do so. We're fortunate to be joined here today by Peter Rogovin and Denise Montgomery, the co-authors of Something to Say. And we will hear from other experts later in the following session who are actually practitioners who helped us draw and harvest the useful principles. Without further words, I'd like to introduce Peter and Denise.
Thank you.
So you're on your own now.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. It's really nice to be here because we've been working on this project for more than a year. And I have to say that after all that time planning the research and then doing the research and analyzing the research and then writing about the research, to actually be here to present the research to people who are in the field is really gratifying. So Denise and I are thrilled to be here. We're going to be talking about engaging tweens in after-school arts programs, selected insights from Something to Say. And before I dig into it, I want to also thank and acknowledge Daniel Windham and the Wallace Foundation. Click. Are we clicking? There we go. Not only, is that nice? Yeah. There you go. It does look like your business card, yeah. But not only for their support of the research, but also for their leadership in the area of arts and after school, and also for Wallace's commitment to disseminating the results of their funded activities, not just among their grantees, but to the field at large. I also want to thank the National Guild, Jonathan Herman and Ken Cole, for giving us this stage and partnering with us in the rollout of this research. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm the founder of a consulting firm called Next Level Strategic Marketing Group. And what we do for the most part is work with clients, mostly in the for-profit sector, on helping them with marketing and brand strategy challenges. And for the most part, what that means is working with them to understand the demand ecosystem. And what I mean by that is we're helping them understand what's going on in the lives of their customers, who are their customers now, who are their customers going to be in the future, how are they making decisions about what to buy and when to buy, who are the influencers. And so we spend a lot of time trying to help them sell more stuff to more people for more money. Right? So when Daniel called and said, we want you to come and take a look at this project. It involves urban low-income tweens and engagement in the arts. We were intrigued, surprised, and a little confused, because we're not really social policy kinds of researchers. We do almost all of our work in the for-profit sector. But when Daniel brought us in at the first meeting and said, you know, we're going to take a completely different look on this challenge, we want to use a consumer lens, everything started to click into place as to why we were at the table. So here's how I'd like to spend the next hour. We're going to talk a little bit about the research approach that we used. I want to talk to you about a couple of the tween insights that I think are relevant in the development of programs. I'll then turn the floor over to Denise, who's going to talk about the 10 success principles, and then we'll have some time for discussion. And then, as Daniel said, we have 3 practitioners who are also involved in the research who, after a short break, will take the stage and also be able to take questions about practical and pragmatic applications of the principles. So, Something to Say, Success Principles for After-School Arts Programs from Urban Youth and Other Experts. We chose the title of our work for 2 reasons. The first is the myriad ways that young people express what they have to say through arts and creative expression. And then second, because of the model that we used for how to engage them, which was to talk directly to the teens, tweens, and their caregivers. So what we used in this research is what we call a consumer research model. And that means that we viewed the young people in the research as consumers. Right? So they don't have a lot of money to spend, but they do have their time, they have their energy, they have their effort, their influence, and because they're the ones who are starting to make decisions about how to spend their time, we see them as consumers. They have choices that they can make about how they spend their time. They can, play ball, they can be doing homework, they can be hanging out. There are lots of different things they can do. It's the idea that they make the choices that allows us to see them as consumers and to engage them in that way in the research. Now, consumer is a little bit of a misnomer. You think consumer, you think the one who consumes, but for us as researchers, we're really interested in who makes the decision. Has anyone ever been called at home by someone who says they want to do a little bit of consumer research, and do you have 5 minutes to answer questions? No one? So, a few people. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So if you've ever been called by a consumer researcher, you know that there's a protocol to how they go about this phone call. The first thing they want to know after they ask some basic demographics, maybe about your income or your household size, is they want to know, are you the decision maker? Are you the one who decides what brand of pasta sauce, or where to get the cable television, or what kind of detergent to use? They want to talk to the decision maker. And then after a few more questions, they're going to ask you, well, how much of this pasta sauce or detergent or whatever the product in question is, how much of this do you use? And if you say not very much, you know what you hear, right? The next thing you hear is, thank you very much, click. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to you because most consumer researchers are interested in speaking to the heavy user. They want to talk to the people who consume a lot of their product. So if you're a McDonald's or Burger King, you want to talk to the person who gets 10 or 15 of their 21 meals a week from a fast food joint. And yeah, that's for real. There are people who do that. They want to talk to the heavy users for a couple of reasons. Right? So one is that a disproportionate amount of their business is driven by the heavy user. There's an 80-20 rule in effect. 20% of the consumers consume 80% of the product. So if they take care of the heavy user and they understand what drives that heavy user to consume, it drives the economic engine and it's good for business. The second reason they want to talk to the heavy user is that they're more involved in the category. So if you are a heavy user of, let's go back to fast food. If you have 15 of your 21 meals a week in a fast food restaurant, you probably know the distinctions between the Burger King versus McDonald's versus Wendy's hamburger patties. But someone who doesn't eat that much fast food doesn't make those distinctions. So people who are heavy users have a lot to say and can really pick up on the nuances of the differences of different brands within a category. Okay? The last thing about the heavy user I should mention is that we want to make more of them. Right? So whatever it is that you're making, if you want to understand the pathway that someone took to becoming a heavy user. So there are people who consume an entire box of Oreos, or maybe 2 boxes of Oreos every week. But at one point in time, they weren't doing that. They were maybe, they'd have 1 Oreo a month, and then they had 1 a week, and then they had 1 a day, and it just got more and more and more and more and more. The people who make Oreos, Mondelez International, they want to understand what happened. When do you eat Oreos? What do you have them as a snack? Is it a reward? They want to understand everything about your Oreo consumption because they want more people to consume 2 boxes of Oreos every week. So who's our heavy user? Our heavy user in the research were the teens who made arts engagement their main out-of-school time activity. They had come through the tween years, and they probably had a lot of other activities going on at one point in time, but then they decided, this is going to be my main activity. All right? And so we talked to them in focus groups about everything about their arts engagement. Where did they find their passion? What sustains their energy? What do their parents think? What do their friends think? Did you ever think about dropping out? Did you ever drop out and come back? That kind of information is really valuable to us because we want to see more people who, by the time they get to their teen years, engaged in arts. So we have to understand the pathway that they took through their tween years to become these heavily engaged arts teens. How did we find the folks who, the subjects of our research? We hung signs up. We picked 5 metropolitan areas around the country. We were in the Bay Area in California, Cleveland, Birmingham, Newark, Philadelphia area, and then on the East Coast in Providence and Boston. And we hung signs up in community group, community centers and churches, near schools. And the sign said, we're conducting research, and call this number if you're interested in getting more information. And we probably had to speak to about, field about 150 to 200 calls before we found a suitable subject. We had to find people who were available to come to the research, that they were the right age and gender. They had to be able to speak clearly because they're going to be part of a focus group and we want to understand what they're saying. And we also had to make sure that they weren't arts rejectors. So if you think about the spectrum of arts engagement, where, from 0 to 10, 0 is someone who has no arts in their life, they completely reject it, they have no interest, they don't want to talk about it, they don't like it, they just say, arts is not for me. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have a 10 where someone says, that's something I'm really into and I really enjoy it and something I do with my time. We basically made the cutoff point at around 3. So the 0s, 1s, and 2s were out. And the reason is that if someone has already decided that something isn't for them at all, it's not great to have them in a focus group. It's like having a vegan at an American Beef Council focus group. Like they're going to sit there and they're going to say, I'm not interested in this. And it's hard to get them to talk for 2 hours about something that they've completely rejected. So we don't want rejectors, but we did screen them. Everyone who was part of the group participated in arts in some level, some privately, some in more formal settings. In all, we spoke to 64 teens, those are our heavy users, over 150 tweens, and that included some heavy users, so we didn't exclude heavy users from the tween group, but we didn't seek them out specifically either, and over 70 parents and caregivers. We spoke to them in focus groups, in community centers and in churches in 5 metro areas, as I mentioned, and all youth participants kept a journal for the 1 week leading up to the focus group where they chronicled how they spent their free time, what decisions they made, and we gave them cameras and they put the pictures in so they could tell us a lot more about how they were making their decisions, and we used those also in shaping some of our discussions. In addition to the direct conversations we had with the young people and their parents and caregivers, we did in-depth interviews with 22 key opinion leaders. These were researchers, practitioners, and academics, some of whom are here in the audience, some are up there. And we visited 8 exemplary youth development organizations, 7 of which were in the arts, 1 of which was not in the arts, to understand what was in their secret sauce and what lessons we could glean from their practices that would inform the research. Oh, and I should mention one other thing, and that is that these 2 streams of research ran in parallel. So we ran one stream of research with the young people and the parents and caregivers, and we said that's the demand side. Those are the people who are out in the marketplace. They're customers, the consumers. They're the ones who create the demand for these programs. And then this was the supply side. These are the people who are offering the programs into the marketplace, who study the programs. We talked to each other. We're a very collaborative team, but we ran them separately to see what insights would come up from each one, and then we looked at what they said together at the end. And all of this was to inform these 3 key questions. How can urban low-income tweens and teens gain equal access to high-quality arts experiences? Is there a model of practices that could provide a blueprint for community-based organizations to emulate so that proven approaches could be deployed in more places more often? And is there a way to approach the analysis of these problems in a way that respects and honors young people as consumers who make informed choices? And how does what youth want, right, the demand side, how does what youth want align with what experts say they need? So let's talk about teens and tweens. Teenagers have been studied for years. There's a lot of information in the literature about them and their essential task of identity formation. Teens are all about telling the world who they are. Tweens, and in this case we're defining tweens as 10 to 13-year-old early adolescents, generally in middle school, are an entirely different demographic. Tweens are all about figuring out belonging. They're trying to figure out where to belong and how to belong. And if you work with tweens or you have tweens in your household, you know that it's all about the group. And they tend to bounce around from different groups. It's almost as if each group has its own little brand. You know, you have the athletes, and actually, and that can be divided up. You can have the football players or the soccer players. You can have the computer kids. Each group has its own distinct personality, and they're trying to figure out which one they fit into. And again, if you work with tweens or you have them in your household, you know that sometimes they just completely abandon the group. They're with one group, and then a couple months later, they're with another group. The other thing about tweens is that one of the things they want more than anything else is to be a teenager. Because who wouldn't want to be 14 again? We wouldn't. Yeah, we wouldn't. Right. If the age fairy came down to the Imperial Ballroom and said you can be any age, would anyone here choose to be 14? All right, so you guys are definitely not tweens, because if you were a tween, that's exactly what you want to be. You are coming out of that stage where you were a little kid, and it seems like teenagers have everything going on. So that's pretty exciting if you're that age. So if we think about teens as being about ego, right? They're all about telling the world who they are. We can think about tweens as being what Dr. Gil Noem from Harvard calls we-go. They're all about the group, trying to figure out which group to belong to, what role they're going to play within that group. Are they accepted by the group? Are they part of the group? It's all about belonging in the group. And, if you think about the word tween, it comes from, in between. It's in between childhood and young adulthood. And the challenge for tweens and what they're going through is that just a few years ago, they were playing with dolls. This might be what they're feeling on the inside. But they're getting a lot of messages from society and media to grow up faster. And so while this may be what they feel like on the inside, this is what they're being told they should be starting to look like on the outside. There are companies all across America that are researching what makes tweens click. I read recently that tweens are responsible themselves for over $20 billion in consumer purchases in this country, but they influence $150 billion in purchases. So companies like this study tweens. They try to understand what's cool, what's not cool, what their parents will let them do or prevent them from doing. And they collect a lot of research, and they do some pretty in-depth studies. But they're for-profit companies, and so they're going to guard all of their insights about tweens as competitive secrets. Wallace, on the other hand, is a not-for-profit, which holds as one of its values to disseminate this. And I know this because one of those companies up there is also one of my clients, that the research that we did here is as broad in scope and it was as professionally managed as any of those companies do in their research. It's so rare, and this is what we've heard from people who've taken a sneak peek at our research, that they haven't seen anything as broad and as deep and as comprehensive as this in this field. So, we're really pleased to be able to offer this, and we hope it provides a lot of value. So let's talk about 3 of the findings from the research, and there are a lot more in the research report, but I'm going to get the hook in about 10 or 15 minutes, so I can only do 3. One is arts terminology, the second is about decision-making processes, and the third is about social networking. So arts terminology. When we went into the focus groups and when we had the individual discussions with the young people and their parents, we asked them, what do you think of when we say the arts or arts programs? And one of the challenges that came up right away is that their clearest associations with the term arts and arts programs are painting, drawing, and sculpture, the visual arts. And they very often said, things that you would see in a museum. The things that they told us that they liked, technology and new media, dancing, some of the graphic arts, they didn't necessarily think of that as arts. The other challenge we had is that when we said arts, one of their closest associations was with arts and crafts. And in this context, what I'm talking about is that model where you say, all right, we're going to build X, or we're going to make X, and here are the materials, and you build it. And you can customize it a little bit, but basically the media is presented to them, and they're following directions, and they're producing something very similar to a prototype. Now, it's not that the tweens don't like arts and crafts. Right? So in some cases, they did like arts and crafts. The challenge here is that when they hear arts, they think arts and crafts. And when they think arts and crafts, they think about the kinds of things they did when they were children. They think this is something for 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. And remember, they want to be teenagers. They're trying to move away from that. They're trying to create as much distance between themselves and the markers of childhood as possible. So if they hear arts and they think arts and crafts, they want to move away from that. And there's more kind of negative association with that term than we expected to hear. Right? So this might be fun, but it's not necessarily what they want to be doing. They're starting to think about moving on, beyond the cat eyes to working with technology and working in media. So terminology is really important. We really heard that you should use descriptive names. So, arts, if you go out with the message that, hey, here are the arts programs, you're almost artificially creating a much narrower band of arts programs in their minds than what you might be offering. You might be thinking, oh, arts is expansive. There's so many things that are part of the arts, but that's not necessarily what they're hearing. They're hearing something much narrower. So right away, you have the two ships crossing in the night, where what we say isn't really what they hear. So be careful about even using the word arts. Use descriptive and engaging names. So, movie making would be better than a general arts program. And what we heard actually from a lot of different organizations is zombies. Zombies take over the Fairmont Hotel would be even more engaging than movie making. And there are some zombies. I think those zombies are actually from Utah. But watch out, they might be coming here. The other point that's related to this, so we're taking this whole demand approach to our research. We're thinking about what the consumers want. And something else that came out of this research was to really think about the consumer lens. Think about what the young people actually want to be learning, not just what we have the opportunity to teach them. So if a volunteer comes in and says, I can teach guitar, that's really tempting to go with that, right? Because it's free labor, but it might not be what they're interested in. And I specifically remember one story, and we kind of heard different versions of this story, but there was one story I remember well from a young woman in Cleveland during one of our focus groups. She said, we were asking her what kind of stuff she liked to do, and she said, well, I really like to design dresses. And so the focus group facilitator said, oh, so you would want to take a class on fashion? She says, well, I don't know if I want to take a class on fashion. So we said, well, how does it work for you then? She said, well, I'm going to design this dress, and I'm going to put it on my friend Charisse. She's really tall and beautiful. I'm going to take pictures of her, and I'm going to put it on Tumblr and Facebook. She probably wouldn't say Facebook today, but a year ago she said Facebook. And Instagram, and I'm going to send that out to everyone I know, and then I'm going to sell a bunch of those dresses because people are going to want to be in that dress, and then I'm going to make some money. And this was all a very fluid process to her. She wasn't interested in taking a class on fashion and a class on entrepreneurship, and then another class on use of social media. And that might be how we might think of it, like what are the skills and capabilities and who are the people who can teach her those things. To her, it was just one very fluid, integrated process of, there's some art, there's some technology, there's some social media, and I'm doing it constantly. So we really have to think, when we talk about designing programs, about how are they thinking about what's interesting to them. It may not be the way we're used to creating programs. So let's talk about the decision-making process. As tweens move from childhood into young adulthood, one of the things that shifts pretty quickly is that when they're children, they go where their parents tell them. The parent presents a few options, say, you can do this, you can go to the Boys and Girls Club, or you can go to the Y, or you can do this. Here are a couple of options for you. And they try to find something that their child is interested in, so the child says, I'd like to do that. As soon as they get into their tween years, that completely flips around to the other way. As tweens, it's the young person who's bringing the options to the parent. And both the parents told us this, and the young people told us this. Some quotes from the research. My parents encourage me to do what I want. It's a 6th grade girl from Cleveland. This 5th grade boy from Newark said, I have 75% of the decision power, and I make more of the decisions. I say there's things I want to do, my mom would have to make sure it's okay. And this 5th grade girl from Cleveland said, I would find a whole bunch of information about it. Then I would ask my mom, and if she said no, I would keep on looking. And then if she still say no, I would beg her. Both the young people and the adults in our research had a pretty sophisticated understanding of the boundaries of this negotiation. The kids knew what the non-starters were. In some households, it couldn't be more than a few miles away. In other households, it couldn't be more than $50 or $100. But they knew. Right? They're going in for a negotiation. They're going to make an ask. Right? They're going in, and they know the boundaries, and they're trying to figure it out, and they are going to have to sell the parent. So for us, for you, the conversation shifts. And this might be more of a challenge for an organization whose sweet spot is the 7, 8, and 9-year-olds, because in that case, you're marketing more to the parents and selling the parents on it. Now we have to talk to the tween and give them the bullet points, the ideas, to successfully negotiate their participation with the parent. It's a complete shift. And it's a change in tone, and it's a change in who the audience is. I want to share just a couple of other insights that we got out of the parent groups. This was at the very end of one of the groups. That's why they look so tired. We've been talking to them for almost 2 hours, just so many questions. The first one, and this surprised us a little bit. I mean, you try as a researcher not to bring your own biases in, and you don't filter through your biases as much as you can help it. But still, it surprised us a little bit when we asked them, if your child starts a program and they're bored by it, do you make them go back? Do you encourage them to finish what they started? And they said no. I said, no, you can't make them do something they don't want to do. And if they're bored, I think they might just not go, and then they'll be somewhere else, and then I don't know where they are. They were very clear with us that there are just some battles not worth fighting, and trying to make them stay in a program that their child thought was boring was not a battle that was worth fighting. And they were pretty specific. I mean, you weren't there, but it was almost like they were talking to you. They just said, well, the program has to be interesting. If you don't make it interesting for my kid, they're going to be bored. I'm not going to make them go. And then we got to find something else. So they wanted it to be interesting because they didn't want to keep looking around, but they were basically saying that there were no penalties for disengagement. They weren't going to make them stay with it. And that surprised us a little bit. Another point was that they associated arts with higher order goals. So they did, when we asked them what's good about arts, they said, well, it's good for creative expression, and there's some teamwork, and there's some, they're working towards a goal. They made those associations, but they were also really clear that arts was not a ticket out of poverty. And so they told us over and over again, they said, if you're going to do arts, if that's going to be your thing, you better have a backup plan. Now, I think a lot of us in the room would probably not necessarily disagree with that it's not the easiest career path. It's not like graduating with a degree in chemical engineering, but at the same time, it really surprised us. And then the juxtaposition of that with what we then asked them was, well, what is a ticket out? And for the parents of middle school boys, a lot of them shared the athletic lottery fantasy. They told us with conviction, my son is going to get drafted. It's going to be an NBA or an NFL draft pick. And is going to make $1 million, and then is going to take care of me. And again, we're sitting in the back room thinking, I know there are stories about that. I know you hear stories about that, and they're real. But there are probably more jobs in the arts than there are in the NFL. There just aren't that many. But they told us with conviction that that's what was going to happen. So this is also a real challenge, that they're heavily invested in this idea of maybe winning the athletic lottery, and that arts is a good thing, it's a nice thing, it's a nice to have, but they don't necessarily see the connection between arts and vocational opportunities. And that's something that we need to think about, how we talk about that and how we emphasize that for them. Let's talk about social networking. So, kids today are growing up at a time when there's so much information at their fingertips. Any band that they become interested in, they can find a YouTube channel on it. If there's a trinket that they want or information that they want, they can go online and find it. And if you work with young people, you know that whenever they have the device in their hands, they're not really present, right? They're there, but they're also thinking about where everyone else is, all the people with whom they're talking. And because we're talking about tweens and how important the social network is, that becomes even more complicated, because what their friends think about what they're doing right now matters a lot. And what it can often seem like to a tween is that I'm here, but there's something more interesting happening over there. And when we want them to really just be focused on what they're doing, they're thinking about where else they could be, and they're worried about what their friends think of it. Of course, one solution is just to take those devices away, but you may or may not have the power to do that. So think about how these things are coming together, because, you know, for us, this is like the perfect storm, but for them, it's the perfect everything. It's the perfect idea. At the exact point in time where their psychosocial development leads them to really care about what their friends think, and at that exact point in time where their parents say there will be no penalty for disengagement, and you have a lot more power to choose what you can do after school, you're handed a tool that enables all of that for you to find out where your friends are and what they're doing. And that just must seem like the greatest idea ever to them, but it's a real challenge, right? It's a real challenge for us. A fifth grade boy in Oakland said, when we asked him, would you go to an arts program? He said, I might not go if other people keep telling me it's whack. That is the perfect summary of what we heard in dozens and dozens of conversations. I might like it, but if my friends think it's not cool, it's just not going to fly. I don't think I'm going to stay with it. So some of the implications of this, first, you know, there's competition, not just from other arts programs, not just from other things that they can be doing, but also we have to compete in terms of making something compelling with what these kids who don't even show up think about it, because that really matters to the kids who are there. There are few obligations to finish. There's almost no penalties for quitting or disengagement. And all of this serves to just dial up the importance of early engagement, of captivating them. You know, we can't keep them captive, but we can captivate them early on and making it really interesting and really fun. And Denise will talk a little bit more about that when she goes through the 10 principles. In all of the research that we did, especially in the focus groups, one of our favorite parts, and I think it was also one of the favorite things that the kids did, was we asked them, all right, now we want you to invent the perfect arts program for you, the one that you and your friends would love to go to. And you can do anything you want. It can be taught by anyone. It can be in any space. It can be as often as you want. Anything on the walls, just anything. You name it, you design it. Right? And we asked boys, we asked girls, and overall, these were the themes that just kept coming up. These were some of the attributes of all these perfect programs. One, expert instructors. They all wanted practicing professional artists. They didn't always use that term, but they were very clear that they didn't want hobbyists. They wanted people who really knew what they were doing. This seventh grade girl from Oakland said, someone who knows what they're talking about. Better if they earn a living from that, so you feel secure in what they know. And this boy from Newark, they have to be famous. If not, then top-notch, the best in New Jersey. They wanted hands-on learning, right? They didn't want to learn about something. And I think we can all think back to classes that we took where the first class was the syllabus, like here are the rules of the class, here's what you're going to do. They want projects, and they want to get into it right from the get-go. They want safe environments. So they would talk about rules. They said, I don't want any craziness going on here. And this played out on a couple of different levels, right? They all wanted physical safety, but they also recognized that they wanted something that we call emotional safety. They didn't use those words, but they were pretty clear that a lot of them, they can't do art with some of their friends. They might get teased for doing art. So they want a place where they can do their creative work, and they're not going to be harassed for it. They wanted safe environments. Whoa. Can you just click that so that just hit continue. They're multiplying. Okay, let's hope we don't see those again. Rituals. They talked about rituals. Now, in some cases, when they talked about rituals, they talked about things like T-shirts or those, the Live Strong kind of bracelet bands. They wanted something that signaled that they were part of something bigger. And they wanted food, and they wanted lots of food. And so, there's the funny part of that comment, which is, just they're growing, and if you know tweens, they eat a lot, and they're always hungry. Their bodies are growing. But there's also, the sad part of that commentary, which is a lot of these kids aren't getting enough to eat, that there's hunger in these neighborhoods, and a lot of them are looking to these after-school programs to supplement the nourishment that they're getting at home or in school. So here's the really interesting thing. After we asked them to create the perfect program for them, the program that is designed around their needs, we said, okay, so if you had a program like this, you would go, right? And about a third of them said, eh. And we're like, no, wait. Change something up. Like, why won't you go? You can do anything. You can make it better. Change it. It's your program. Anything you want, put into it. And then we said again, now would you go? And again, about a third of them said, no, probably not. Why not? Because a lot of youth do art as an escape. They're not interested in a program. They're doing their art on their private time. They go into their room, they close the door, they write their poetry, they draw. They want to do it on their own. This is their escape valve from whatever else is going on in the world. And they're not interested in doing it in a public forum. Not yet, maybe not ever, we don't know. But even with the perfect program, they wouldn't always want to be part of it. One interesting part of that is that the program attendants may vastly underestimate arts engagement, right? Because if a third of the people are doing their arts privately, and they're not doing it as part of a program, then there might be a lot more people in a community who are engaged in arts, and we just don't know about it because they're doing it on their own. I shared that list with you, and Denise is about to come up and talk about the 10 principles that came mostly from the supply side. But what was really incredible to us, remember I mentioned before that we ran these as separate but parallel research tracks? What we found on the demand side almost perfectly mirrored what we found on the supply side. There was strong alignment between what youth want and what experts say they need. Now you could look at that and say, well, that was pretty obvious because the experts say they need this because they see it works. It's a circular argument, but it's not necessarily true, right? Like you think about snack food. If you ask experts what do kids need, they say, well, they probably need more fiber and more protein and less sugar. And what do kids want? Sugar, salt, fat. These things don't always line up in research, but in this case they did. And that was really interesting to us because it's a completely different set of problems, right? If what they want and what they need aren't the same, now we've got a problem of figuring out how do we get those into alignment and try to serve the demand. But in this case, they were very much in alignment, and so now we have the problem of figuring out how to get this model out and how to make it work better. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Denise, who's going to take you through the 10 principles.
Thank you, Peter. So we wanted to know how is it that some after-school arts programs are so successful in attracting and retaining the participation of tweens and teens, while other programs really struggle to get young people in the door. And once they do get tweens and teens to try out their programs, some of those programs are challenged in retaining their participation. We also wanted to know, are these different organizations of excellence working in youth development in the arts, are they doing a lot of the same things, and are those things exportable and replicable by other organizations? And the answer is yes. In fact, a strikingly consistent set of principles emerged from our study of these organizations, and they were validated by our interviews with key opinion leaders, so people who are experts in adolescence and in after school and the arts, as well as being validated by the literature review. So that was really exciting. So we got these principles from the work, and the first 5 may be more familiar to people working in the arts, and the second 5 may be more familiar to people who have more of a background in youth development. But because the audience for this report includes both people working at youth development organizations and youth development program providers, as well as arts organizations and teaching artists and funders, we think there's something valuable here for everyone, and we know there's a lot of crossover there too. And the magic of the principles is not necessarily in their newness or discovery, but rather how they're applied in practice, and significantly in aggregating them, because these best practice organizations are doing all of them in some fashion. As youth development organizations seek to increase the quantity and quality of their arts offerings, and they are seeking to do this nationally, and as arts organizations seek to reach more people, there are lots of opportunities for partnerships, and I know a number of you are actively engaged in such partnerships, leveraging your areas of expertise and a program partner's area of expertise. Now we'll get to an overview of the principles, and throughout my remarks you'll hear video clips from 6 of our interviews with practitioners kind of sprinkled throughout. So the principles are not listed in any particular order, with one exception, and that's the first principle about practicing professional artists as instructors, and that's because of the importance of this principle to programs. A question that we loved to ask when we met with arts organizations, because it yielded such rich responses, was what's in your secret sauce, as in what makes your program so successful? The most common answer by a wide margin was this: hiring practicing professional artists as instructors. And we know that practicing professionals, they have more to teach youth because they have more knowledge and experience themselves of the art form, of artistic practice, of the creative process. And youth are attracted to this real-world experience. And what we're talking about in terms of professionals here are people who exhibit the markers of professionalism. So people who are compensated for their art, who regularly exhibit, publish, perform, who are trained and or have a degree in their discipline. And even if they augment their income from art with other sources of income, such as teaching, art is their chosen profession and not just a hobby. Such artist instructors possess a unique credibility among youth who our research showed are more receptive to meeting high standards and project deadlines set by people with the same expectations for themselves. Also, we all know that tweens and teens don't want to feel duped. And if they start to get the feeling that someone doesn't have a lot of experience themselves, or if they don't really know what they're doing, that is a huge turnoff, and tweens disengage. So hobbyists and well-meaning volunteers will not be able to take youth beyond where they are themselves in terms of their knowledge and experience. Here's Hodari Davis from Youth Speaks in San Francisco, one of the organizations that we studied. If you could please cue the video.
And as much as the organization that's hosting that activity commits to the professionalization of that artist, it starts with them committing to a professional artist to educate them and teach them, mentor them, guide them. And more often than not, that doesn't happen. And that, I think, is the biggest detriment for all arts organizations and all other organizations that aspire to do arts. It's like this idea that anybody could do it. But if you are hiring somebody to teach Kung Fu in your YMCA, they better be a master or have a black belt. And the principle is the same for anything else. You're not going to hire somebody to teach the swimming class who can't save the kid when they're drowning.
So you'll see that the principles really interrelate, and this quote from Rebecca London at the Gardner Center for Youth in Their Communities at Stanford, she's making the link about professional artists and youth engagement, because this is about how youth, they want to learn something and they want to gain skills, and professional artists are going to be most able to help make that happen for young people. And of course the teaching artists must want to work with youth and must be effective working with youth. And that might be something to discuss at the 4 o'clock session with the practitioners. How do they make those hiring decisions, those very critical decisions about who to bring into their team? We had some interesting discussion about that at dinner last night, and I think a lot of good thinking to share. Some people think that artists should donate their time to after-school arts programs, and many artists generously do. You might have seen there was an article in this past Sunday's New York Times about how artists and creative professionals so often are asked to donate their time and talents without compensation. And we heard from program directors and managers about how the Zumba instructor at their organization didn't understand why the artist with an MFA was making as much money hourly as they are, or about the CEO of the organization that wanted to just get people to volunteer rather than pay them for their time. High quality, and it's difficult to sustain a high quality program that's predicated on the ongoing volunteerism of unpaid professionals. So high quality programs hire practicing professional artists and they compensate them to retain them. There's clearly a link between compensation and retention, and this relates to another principle that we'll discuss later about relationships. So low turnover, where staff are sticking around for years on end, that's really going to support relationship building with youth, as opposed to a high turnover situation that makes that really challenging. So this principle is not the place to cut corners and is really the foundation on which to build a quality program. Principle 2 is about executive directors being outspoken advocates for the arts. And this might seem really obvious, but it can't be assumed, especially if you're talking about an organization that's offering programming in multiple areas. And we did interview directors and staff at organizations like the Latin American Youth Center in Washington, D.C., and Youth Uprising in Oakland, California, and other organizations that have programming in multiple areas such as athletics, academics, and the arts. So the executive directors at the best practice organizations that we studied are doing more than merely including the arts as part of their program mix. They're actively taking steps to ensure the success of arts programs. And some of the things that they're doing are they're giving the art program directors a seat at the table in senior management meetings so that person knows what's going on in the big picture, so they can form relationships, so they can advocate for their programs. They're also allocating dedicated physical space to arts programs. And again, this is something that can't be assumed in organizations that are offering multiple types of programming. Space can be a real challenge, and by allocating space, that's really showing that this is an important part of the organization. They're also making sure that the arts are a visible part of their identity in the annual report, on the website. This is a screenshot from OLA, Heart of Los Angeles, and I'm not sure if the type size is large enough to read, but the circle is showing that arts are alongside academics and athletics as a core programming area, and you don't need to click 5 layers down and search around to find that. And on this particular day, there was a feature story about the arts on the homepage. So as a teaser of something that's in the report that might be useful to you is that there's a section about how to turn CEOs into arts champions. And this is taken directly from advice and ideas and input from people working in organizations where they were able to make headway in this area and move the head of their organization from maybe being ambivalent or maybe even being disinterested or uncomfortable to really becoming an arts champion. So this is something that you could share with a program partner or potential partner if they're looking to move along their CEO or maybe their staff too. So moving on to principle 3, spaces matter. Arts programs have practical facilities needs ranging from ventilation to storage for supplies, but spaces matter for symbolic and emotional reasons as well. And dedicated physical areas signal to youth that arts programs are valued and worthy. Urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg talks about how everyone needs a third place, and that's a social gathering location that's different from home or work, or in the case of tweens and teens, a social gathering location that's different from home or school, that's a place where they feel comfortable and can be themselves and feel welcome. So the places where out-of-school time arts programs take place can be that third place for young people. And our research pointed to 3 key factors using space to drive the culture and creative energy of out-of-school time arts programs. First, that the young people feel the space is theirs and reflects their vision and values. And we heard from many organizations who talked about the early days of their programs where space was dilapidated, but youth didn't mind because the space belonged to them. The research report talks about the teen lounge movement in Philadelphia, where at least 5 arts programs have dedicated teen lounges that have become an important part of their approach, including Fleischer Art Memorial in South Philadelphia. That's one of the case study organizations. We've also heard talk about a tween lounge movement, and maybe that will come next. And I think that Magda Martinez is at the conference, so Magda, if you're here and during the discussion period, if you have anything that you'd like to share about the teen lounge at Fleischer or just space in general, we'd love to hear that. Second, that the space is positive and affirming. And this image is from 826 Valencia, which is a creative writing and tutoring center that's in the Mission District in San Francisco, and it's part of a national network of such centers. And there is wood furniture and carpeting and bookcases. There are posters celebrating individual young people as writers with author profiles. And one of the really fun things about every 826 location is that the part of the space where the creative writing and the tutoring takes place always can be accessed by some sort of secret passageway. So in this case, there's a hidden moving bookcase. And the young people just love it, that they are in the know and can come back to this wonderful, warm space. And then also, of course, the spaces must be functional and ideally dedicated to one or more art forms. So this is an image from NDI, New Mexico, and their studios are outfitted with appropriate Marley flooring to support movement and to be gentle on dancers' knees and other joints. So principle 4 is about high expectations. And a hallmark of youth organizations is their belief in the capacity of young people's to achieve. So a principle around high expectations may not seem groundbreaking. The principle here has the added dimension of affirming youth participants as artists. So I'll talk about some of the aspects of this principle in practice, but first we'll watch a video of Russell Baker from the National Dance Institute of New Mexico. Do we have the video? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
So we talk about the importance of perseverance, not giving up. Just because something is challenging doesn't mean you should stop or you should give up. The class knows that we're working together as a team and that we're not going to stop until we all get it. And if we're still working on a step, that means someone or someone's still need more time. We call them dancers. Dancers, let's everybody stand up. They're like, I'm a dancer. I want to be a dancer. I want to be a better dancer. And so I think the building skills is I want to be a better person. I want to be my best self.
So calling youth artists, writers, dancers reinforces the belief in the students' ability to produce quality work and that their work is being taken seriously. Another aspect of this principle in practice is mandatory attendance or hours. Many of the programs have mandated attendance because high-quality programs have ambitious goals, and young people can't come in for 2 hours a month and build skills and make progress toward those goals. And I know that Shirley Bryce Heath is here at the conference, and she's researched and written about this subject. Another one of the key opinion leaders that we also interviewed for the project said so many after-school programs are focused on making sure that nothing bad happens. I hope that more programs will be focused on making sure something good happens, and that, of course, requires time. A third important dimension of high expectations as they manifest in out-of-school time arts programs is creating original works of art. And we acknowledge that there are many ways to approach skill building in the arts. Our focus was how to engage urban low-income tweens, and this was a consistent theme that we heard from organizations. And then lastly, formalized peer and expert critique. And we're not talking about hollow praise where every effort is treated as a masterpiece, but authentic discussion about young people's work with validation for their efforts. Still, self-publishing has lowered the bar, and organizations face a whole new set of challenges with the proliferation of amateur videos on YouTube and on the web, and with the ease with which young people can create and post work online. They're arriving in some cases at programs thinking, I've been there, I've done that, I don't really need this. And their sense of standards and quality is really different. Here's Adam Sherlock from SpyHop, a media arts organization for youth, on this subject.
These kids are watching YouTube videos being uploaded by their peers that are just, to us as adults, are terrifying to see because the sound quality is so horrible and like the camera's shaking around like Blair Witch the whole time and you're like, this is awful, but kids love it and that's what they grow up on. And so for them to take that next step and to say, you're not done yet, like there's so much more that needs to go into this to get it to that level. And a lot of times that's by doing things like Pitchnik, where you go, when these kids enter into a year-long film program, one of the very first things they do is go to last year's premiere. And they get to see it's on this massive screen, and they get to see there's all these people there, and it is on this really, really high-quality level, and it kind of scares the crap out of them because they're like, oh man, we got to really make a good movie here. Like, we can't just, you know, mess around for an hour with a camera and call it good.
So one of the functions of exhibitions and screenings is about setting expectations. It's also about showcasing the accomplishments of youth. So let's talk about culminating events, which we heard about a lot and saw in our study of these organizations. A high-quality arts program builds toward an apex. It's never just 8 weeks of activity and then a pat on the back for a job well done. Culminating events such as performances and exhibitions provide focal points for young people's experiences in out-of-school time arts programs, and they're like a destination, keeping the young people on track, focused toward this goal and pacing their progress. For tweens and teens who spend so much time in a virtual world, presenting their work to a real audience is especially powerful. And the truth is that for the vast majority of youth, mass internet audiences for their work simply don't materialize. So the dream of going viral happens for very few. So the ability to reach a substantial and real audience is one feature that differentiates strong out-of-school time arts programs from what youth might experience by creating work independently. Here's Lissa Soap of Youth Radio in Oakland, California, talking about the importance of real audiences.
So number one is the audience factor, right? So that it's not just let me put my work up on the wall or let me share it with a closed group of fellow producers and then it gets filed away in a portfolio, but instead there's some kind of a public release for that work. So it creates high stakes, it creates high levels of engagement. It really matters that they get it right and that they support each other in doing that. So that audience factor is key.
And who's in the audience matters too. So an audience that extends beyond the program staff and the program participants to include community members, the arts community, even the media, that's important. And people who work with youth every day, like Adama Nasco from New Mexico School of the Arts, attest to the importance of a real audience. And this is about keeping it real. Young people, they want to know this is a kind of positive risk-taking and high stakes in the best way that's engaging and exciting. They want to know that there are people in the audience that are not just people that they're pretty confident are going to tell them they did a great job, but where it's a real audience of people that don't necessarily know them. Also, youth are besieged with negative messages about teenagers and middle schoolers in the media. And events provide a chance to spotlight the accomplishments of young people and show what they're capable of and give the setting and the opportunity for a young person to experience that, wow, I didn't know you had that talent, or that was incredible. Principle 6 is about relationships both with adult program mentors and also with peers. So given the vast amount of free how-to videos and creative inspiration that's available online. Why do young people need structured out-of-school time arts programs? A major reason is their desire for meaningful flesh and blood relationships, both friendships with peers and also bonds with caring adults. We found in our research that mentoring forms the focus of the relationships between youth participants and adults in the best practice organizations. And I think this is a really beautiful quote from Jason Yoon, who's formerly with New Urban Arts in Providence, Rhode Island, and who's now with the Queens Museum of Art as their education director. There's a dignity when an adult whom you admire, whom you look up to, who is an artist you probably want to be like, asks you what you are interested in, what you are trying to make. What are the questions you're asking in your life? We also found out that we heard from a lot of people that peer mentoring is a really important strategy that is very useful for both the person doing the mentoring and also the person being mentored who can see that they themselves might become a mentor someday. Here's John Hinojosa, Executive and Artistic Director of CC in San Antonio, and also board member of the Guild, talking about mentoring at CC. Do we have the video coming, please? Thanks. It's not good.
I was really heartened. I had taken a couple of students, both a middle school student and a high school mentor, to a presentation recently. And when they introduced themselves, they said, it's my pleasure to introduce somebody that I really look up to and admire. And then when the mentor got up to speak, he turned and looked at that middle school student and said, I admire you just as much.
So how do these programs build a culture of mentorship and belonging? They are intentional about many things, and I'll talk about just three. One is language, and the organizations in our study frequently use terms such as artist mentors and poet mentors to signal that there's a mutually respectful relationship between the adults and the young people, and also skill sharing. They avoid more impersonal terms such as teachers or instructors. The bonds that form between young people participating in these programs are particularly strong, in part because they're based on shared interests and less about less proximity driven, which is what they experience more in school and in neighborhoods. And it can be tough being an arts kid or someone who self-identifies as creative in school cultures that revere athletes or other groups. Many of the youth that we spoke with at case study organizations talked about finding their people and about how valuable and important that is to them. So the best practice organizations really, they find ways to nurture and support these relationships. And one example that I really like is at River's Edge Arts Project in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. They use a daily self-rating system where each day when the young people arrive, they indicate on a scale of 1 to 5 how they're doing that day. And they know that any number below a 3 or consistent consecutive days of 3s is going to trigger an artist mentor seeking them out one-on-one to talk with them, find out how they're doing, how they might support them, what's going on. So that way, in that way, the young people are easily able to access that support and that one-on-one connection. At River's Edge, they post these ratings publicly, and the director, Becca Speck, said that they're comfortable doing this because they do have mandatory hours, and the young people are spending so much time with each other each week that they have these deep relationships and that they feel comfortable doing that. So because the ratings are public, they can also trigger support from other youth, and often do. One of the key opinion leaders that we talked with said, if you want belonging, you need rituals. Rituals work because young people feel in the know and a part of something, whether it's a special way of starting the day, whether it's a rite of passage for people who are leaving the program. In the research report, we have a section about rituals that describes a number of them at different programs, from Call of the Griot at Youth Speaks to Hello Goodbye at CC. So Principle 7 is about young people actively shaping programs and assuming meaningful leadership roles. As we conducted our research, we saw a model for youth involvement that really pushed the concept of youth leadership forward. we observed programs where young people were working side by side with program staff and program managers, talking about what kinds of offerings they want, how to tweak them, and the program staff really worked with them and obliged. We saw programs where young people actively participated in board meetings, sometimes by holding a seat on the board. So there's a real sense of collaboration among adults and youth in how these organizations are run programmatically. In this next video clip, Jason Yoon describes one aspect of the influential role of youth at Urban Arts.
The very DNA of the space is youth-directed. The young people are choosing who their teachers are. And I was actually speaking with someone said something really beautiful to me. She said, you know, your students are actually choosing their heroes in this place, in a culture and an educational system where those kinds of choices are usually pretty rare.
So facilitating youth voice and youth leadership are in part engagement strategies, and while it's logical that young people will feel more invested in programs that they've helped design, how much is the right amount of involvement? And it's different for tweens and teens, and this is the guideline that organizations shared with us, is tween programs are youth-informed and teen programs are youth-led. SPIHAP has invented a term called Flexulum, and this is about how being flexible is so important to embracing youth input and youth voice. So they coined this term because they would often find themselves with well laid out project plans only to be revising them significantly based on youth input, and rather than resisting changes to their vision and to their planning, they adopt a really pragmatic and agile approach that's an inherent part of being open to youth input. And in the research report, we describe how SPIHAP reinvented what had been an independent record label program into live music sessions based on youth input and changing interests. Principle 8 is about hands-on skill building and current equipment and technology. It's increasingly important to front-load the excitement and fun and get young people engaged in the doing from the very beginning. That introductory lecture overview model doesn't work so well with tweens today. If they don't leave on day one having done something interesting and fun, they might not come back. If there's technology involved, organizations try to get the young people using the technology early on in the first program session. And if there isn't technology involved, they still are having young people immersed in whatever the art form is, such as at National Dance Institute of New Mexico. Kids are up and dancing within the first 15 minutes of the first program session. So engagement is about pace, and it can also be about access to equipment and technology. Here is Cassandra Verbruggen from SPIHAP.
We value you enough to have this, high-tech space with this expensive equipment that you get to touch on the very first day that you're here. And that we respect you, and in turn you will respect us, and it happens.
So another example of rapid engagement through actual doing is at youth radio, where young people are live on the air for a web radio broadcast within their first 2 weeks of joining the program. The veterans cheer on the newcomers who are buoyed by the obvious confidence that the organization has in them. And they also almost immediately tackle what might be the most intimidating aspect of this program, being live on the air. So part rite of passage and part engagement strategy. Going on the air creates a pride and an excitement about being involved in youth radio. And you can just imagine the momentum that they get going right from the beginning. The report goes into further detail on project-based learning. These are images from anthologies from the 826 program. Principle 9 is about strategically engaging key stakeholders to create a network of support for both youth and programs. These organizations cast a wide yet selective net of community supporters, from healthcare to law enforcement to parks and recreation folks, the media. And what these varied movers and shakers in the community have in common is a concern for the lives of young people. Here's a quote from Shirley Bryce Heath, who advocates going beyond the usual suspects. This is an image of a judge at an art opening. And she advocates reaching out to people and saying, we'd love to have you come, and we're doing this work right now, and we'd like to hear from you. What do you think, and what did you see, and what did you learn? And really engaging them, moving beyond just parents and schools, and involving more people. So these organizations have their tendrils out in the community, and it reaps all sorts of benefits to young people who can see that people are interested and they're showing up, and they're able to interact with them, to the organizations who find all sorts of partnerships and support. And the last principle, Principle 10, is about physical and emotional safe places. And in the arts, emotional safety is particularly important. The programs need to be places where young people can share their fears and pain and struggles, as well as their joys and aspirations, and know that their creative expression will be met with respect and compassion. One of the teen poets at Youth Speaks, Stephanie Yoon, who's pictured on the far right, she had this to say: one of the big differences between me just sitting at home writing and me coming into Youth Speaks workshops is the atmosphere that's created. It's really a safe space. You can say whatever you want, whatever you feel. And Gil Noam describes what can happen in an atmosphere where youth feel comfortable expressing themselves creatively. He says, the chance we have is to understand young people differently, to build their assets and strengths, to allow them to experiment without being judged. So that was a quick run through the principles. And also just a word about implementation, and that is that the organizations we studied have built up to where they are today, both in terms of their overall operations and their implementation of the principles. In many cases, they've taken years to get to where they are now, and they continue to refine their approaches. Our hope is that the principles create an understanding of the benefits that organizations and young people accrue when they're in place, and there's something to work toward. We encourage you to download the research report, which is going to be available on Tuesday, November 12th. So a week from this coming Tuesday, this will all be on the Wallace Foundation's website. There's an executive summary, which lists the 10 principles, the full report, which is just robust with examples. And then there's also a suite of videos. So there's a project overview video. There are 6 video case study profiles. And then we had such great content from the interviews that we did with the key opinion leaders that there are 5 videos that are condensed versions of the interviews with the key opinion leaders. So these are the kind of things that you might ask your staff to watch and then come together and I'll discuss them, or watch them if you need a jolt of inspiration or ideas. So we really hope that you access all of these resources. So thank you, and we are happy to take questions and to hear your comments. Thank you.